Chapter 1. The Hermetic Philosophy. The lips of wisdom are closed, except to the ears of understanding. The Kybalion. From old Egypt have come the fundamental, esoteric, and occult teachings which have so strongly influenced the philosophies of all races, nations, and people for several thousand years. Egypt, the home of the pyramids and the Sphinx, was the birthplace of the hidden wisdom and mystic teachings. From her secret doctrine all nations have borrowed. India, Persia, Chaldea, Media, China, Japan, Assyria, ancient Greece, and Rome, and all in other ancient countries partook liberally at the feast of knowledge which the hierophants and masters of the land of Isis so freely provided for those who came prepared to partake of the great stone of mystic and occultic love which the masterminds of ancient land had gathered together. Now, this is one of the main things that a lot of people say, that all these lands took from Egypt, which I would tend to disagree with. That it's like saying America or any country took love from the Egyptians. Well, love is a common trait in all men. So it's not like you took it, it's just that which is in existence. And so these same teachings, although it was probably first written by Egyptians, it doesn't mean that other countries took from it. Other countries expound on what they've seen with their own eyes, not what they have read from somebody in ancient times. So I would tend to disagree with that. It reads on. In ancient Egypt dwelt the great adept and masters who have never been surpassed and who seldom have been equaled during the centuries that have taken their professional flight since the days of the great Hermes. In Egypt was located the great lodge of lodges of the mystics. At the door of her temples entered the neophytes who afterward, as hierophants, adepts, and masters, traveled to the four corners of the earth, carrying with them the precious knowledge which they were ready, anxious, and willing to pass on to those who were ready to receive the same. All students of the occult recognize the debt that they owe to these venerable masters of that ancient land. But among these great masters of ancient Egypt, there once dwelt one of whom masters hailed as the master of masters. This man, if man indeed he was, dwelt in Egypt in the earliest days. He was known as Hermes Trismegistus. He was the father of the occult wisdom, the founder of astrology, the discoverer of alchemy. The details of his life story are lost to history, owing to the lapse of years through several of the ancient countries, though several of the ancient countries disputed with each other in their claims to the honor of having furnished his birthplace, and this thousands of years ago. The date of his sojourn in Egypt, in that his last incarnation on this planet, is not now known, but it has been fixed at the early days of the oldest dynasties of Egypt, long before the days of Moses. The best authorities regard him as a contemporary of Abraham, and some of the Jewish traditions go so far as to claim that Abraham acquired a portion of his mystic knowledge from Hermes himself. As the years roll by after his passing from this plane of life, tradition recording that he lived 300 years in the flesh, the Egyptians deified Hermes and made him one of their gods under the name Ptah. Years after, people of ancient Greece also made him one of their many gods, calling him Hermes, the god of wisdom. The Egyptians revered his memory for many centuries, yes, tens of centuries, calling him the scribe of the gods, and bestowing upon him distinctively his ancient title, Trismegistus, which means the thrice great, the great great, the greatest great, etc. In all the ancient lands, the name of Hermes Trismegistus was revered, the name being synonymous with the fount of wisdom. Even to this day, we use the term hermetic in the sense of secret, sealed, so that nothing can escape, etc. And this by reason of the fact that the followers of Hermes always observed the principle of secrecy in their teachings. They did not believe in casting pearls before swine, but rather held to the teaching, milk for babes, meat for strong men, both of which maxims are familiar to the readers of the Christian scriptures, but both of which have been used by Egyptians for centuries before the Christian era. Again, it's trying to ascribe that Christians took this from Egyptians, but this is just a principle of wisdom, of life. Like I said before, you would not teach algebra to a babe. And this policy of careful dissemination of truth has always characterized the Hermetics. Even unto the present day, the Hermetic teachings are to be found in all lands among all religions, but never identified with any particular country, nor with any particular religious sect. This because of the warning of the ancient teachers against allowing secret doctrine to become crystallized into a creed. And that's somewhat true. I'm not speaking so far as the Hermetic teachings, but you cannot confine God to a creed, and that's what many do. Oh, my book only has the truth for God. Well, God is vast and infinite, so anything you touch, anywhere you look is God. God can be found in anything, anywhere, anytime, if you understand what God is and what you're looking for. See, all religious sects are just signposts pointing to this God. So people study these signposts and think they know God when they can understand the signposts back and forth. It's like an ancient saying that a man was pointing his disciple to the moon, and the disciple is breaking down every crevice and every print on his finger and saying he sees the truth, only looking at the finger and never looking at what the finger is pointing to, which was the moon. The wisdom of this causation is apparent to all students of history. The ancient occultism of India and Persia degenerated and was largely lost, owing to the fact that the teachers became priests and so mixed theology with the philosophy. The result being that occultism in India and Persia has been gradually lost amidst the mass of religious superstition, cults, creeds, and, quote, gods. So it was with ancient Greece and Rome. So it was with the Hermetic teachings of the Gnostics and early Christians, which were lost at the time of Constantine, whose iron hand smothered philosophy with the blanket of theology, losing to the Christian church that was its very essence and spirit, and causing it to grope throughout several centuries before it found its way back to its ancient faith. The indications apparent to all careful observers in this 20th century being that the church is now struggling to get back to its ancient mystic teachings. But there were always a few faithful souls who kept alive the flame, tending it carefully and not allowing its light to become extinguished. And thanks to the staunch hearts and fearless minds, we have the truth still with us. But it is not found in books to any great extent. It has been passed along from master to student, from initiate to hierophant, from lip to ear. See, and he's saying this truth is spoken through words, but not written in text, but spoken, passed down from generation to generation. But the truth is the spirit that holds all things. The spirit that hears this voice right now. The spirit that sees the thoughts. The spirit that sees manifestation. All manifested things come out of that spirit, which you are in your essence. That's the truth. That could be found at any time because it's ever present. but words are just pointers to it. They are not the truth in themselves. Words are also manifested from this great spirit. When it is written down at all, its meaning was veiled in terms of alchemy or astrology. And that's one thing that people don't get about the ancient alchemists, is that they weren't just dealing with turning lead to gold. This is also seen in any religious text. You're turning the flesh into spirit, or transmuting a fleshly being into a spiritual being. This was the symbolism behind the alchemists, of turning something that is metal, one metal that is a lesser metal of lead, into the most precious metal, which is gold. And it's the same with the flesh into the spirit, because once you have been transmuted into the spirit, you see everything is spirit. What do I mean? When you dream, right? Let's take the dream world. When you dream, you see yourself as touching, seeing, tasting, feeling, hearing, even thinking. But when you awake from that dream, just like when you awake from the dream of this world, you will see that everything you were touching, tasting, feeling, seeing in your dream was only made of one substance, which is mind. It was no actual physical thing, although you appeared to be physically touching. It was all made of this one substance called the mind, or your imagination. Well, it's the same thing with the reality of this world. What you are in your essence is spirit, or awareness, or consciousness. And everything, from your sights to your tastes to your thoughts to your sounds, are all made of this spirit. There is no such thing as physical there is no such thing as physical or matter in truth, in reality. It only appears that way to a relative mind, or a finite mind, the individual self. And so it says, when it was written down at all, its meaning was veiled in terms of alchemy and astrology, so that those possessing the key could read it aright. Excuse me. This was made necessary in order to avoid the persecutions of the theologians of the Middle Ages, who fought the secret doctrine with fire and sword, stake, giblet, and cross. Even to this day, there will be found but few reliable books on the Hermetic philosophy, although there are countless references to it in many books written upon various phases of occultism. And yet, the Hermetic philosophy is the only master key which will open all doors of occult teaching. Which I would disagree with. It's only one thing that opens all doors, and that is the spirit that lies within everything. See, we are told to look for God outside of us, but when you seek that which is inside of you, how vast are you to hold God as a single thought in your mind? As one of my brothers once said, how vast are you to hold God in you, in your mind? So find out what you are, and when you ultimately find out what you are, that is the master key. That is the master, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, that which brings all into manifestation. You will see it clearly, not as just intellectual knowledge. In the early days, there was a compilation of certain basic Hermetic doctrines passed on from teacher to student, which was known as the Kybalion. The exact significant meaning of the term has been lost for several centuries. This teaching, however, is known to many to whom it has descended from mouth to ear and on throughout the centuries. Its precepts have never been written down or printed so far as we know. It was merely a collection of maxims, axioms, and precepts, which were non-understandable to outsiders, but which were readily understood by students after the axioms, maxims, and precepts had been explained and exemplified by the Hermetic initiates to their neophytes. And anybody who does not know what a neophyte is, that's just a beginner, a neophyte. I remember my Hebrew, when I was in Hebrew studies, my teacher used to call the beginners neophytes. Initiates are those who have been initiated into the process. Adepts are those who are high up in the scale, or masters. These teachings really constitute the basic principles of the art of Hermetic alchemy, which, contrary to general belief, dealt in the mastery of mental forces rather than material elements. The transmutation of one kind of mental vibration into others instead of changing of one kind of metal into another. And that's one of the reasons I read this book 4 or 5 years ago, because I was looking to see, how do I change myself from a sinner to a saint? And one of the teachings in this book, it talks about mental transmutation. And I used to think this was the way to do it, which it is not the way to freedom. It's just mental magic. That's all it is. Learning how to transmute. You're still repressing. See, in absolute freedom, freedom allows or accepts all things. But in mental alchemy, which I believe the science is spoken about in this book, you repress that. Like, say you have a feeling of hate. Well, you transmute that hate, which is the same as love, and you dwell on thoughts of love. But yeah, so that's what this book goes into. So it says the transmute, and that's one of the reasons why people love to get into occult knowledge, to use it for their own personal gain. So they use these practices and these tricks to transmute others' minds on how they want them to act. So it says, the legends of the philosopher's stone, which would turn base metal into gold, was an allegory relating to Hermetic philosophy, readily understood by all students of true Hermeticism. In this little book, of which this is the first lesson, we invite our students to examine into the Hermetic teachings as set forth in the Kybalion, and as explained by ourselves, humble students of the teachings, who, while bearing the title of initiates, are still students at the feet of Hermes, the Master. We herein give you many of the maxims, axioms, and precepts of the Kybalion, accompanied by explanations and illustrations, which we deem likely to render the teachings more easily comprehended by the modern student, particularly as the original text is purposely veiled in obscure terms. The original maxims, axioms, and precepts of the Kybalion are printed herein in quotation marks, the proper credit being given. Our own work is printed in the regular way, in the body of the work. We trust that the many students to whom we now offer this little work will derive as much benefit from the study of its pages as the many who have gone before, treading the same path to mastery throughout the centuries that have passed since the times of Hermes Trismegistus, the master of masters, the great, in the words of the Kybalion. Quote, where the fall of the footsteps of the master, the ear of those ready for his teachings open wide, the Kybalion. Quote, when the ear of the student are ready to hear, when the ears of the student are ready to hear, then cometh the lips to fill them with wisdom, the Kybalion. So that according to the teachings, the passage of this book to those ready for the instruction will attract the attention of such as prepared to receive the teaching. And likewise, when the pupil is ready to receive the truth, then will this little book come to him or her. Such is the law, the Hermetic principle of cause and effect. In its aspect, the law of attraction will bring the lips and ears together. pupil and book and company. So mote it be. The end of chapter 1.